Today, we're going to be talking about Deadpool and Wolverine, plus Borderlands. Both films are chaotic and crazy, but do they both manage to pull it off equally well? That and more on today's episode of The Real Review, so stay tuned. Welcome to The Real Review, where you get some of the latest happenings, real thoughts, and real perspectives in the world of film and television. Let's get right into things with Deadpool and Wolverine. The synopsis for this film is Deadpool is offered a place in the MCU by the Time Variance Authority, but instead recruits a variant of Wolverine to save his universe from extinction. It's directed by Sean Levy. It stars a number of different people in a surprisingly large amount of cameos, but primarily Ryan Reynolds as Wade Wilson Deadpool, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, and Emma Corrin as Cassandra Nova. I think clearly there was a lot of anticipation for this third iteration of the Deadpool franchise. The first one, in many ways, had been pretty much a surprise success for a lot of the general public. Deadpool, I believe, for most people, prior to the iteration of the first film, was a pretty lesser-known Marvel character. He had a very strong following and a very strong fan base, so I'm in no way trying to attack the character, but was pretty well unrecognized within, I think, most of the general public. I think Deadpool 1 came into the game strong and came into the superhero franchise, if you will, of films of any genre in a very different and distinct way. Managed to find that balance of both being adult and sort of over-the-top in nature, but also being a good hero film, a good versus evil type story. So there was a lot of anticipation, again, wrapped up into this third film. When I stepped into this one, I really did try to take a step back and approach this as though I was seeing this film outside of the anticipation that I wanted to have in my own head and my own heart, especially considering a lot of where I feel like the MCU and a lot of their story has developed over the last couple of years with this current stage that we've been in. With the multiverse. That being said, I do think overall Deadpool left me with a very excited and happy feeling for where the MCU is going to be headed. Getting right into some of I'd probably actually rather start with the not so good elements, just because I think there's a lot of positives to talk about this film. One of the most negative aspects of this film, if you could really call it a negative, more just has to do with the story. It's a very good film. It's a very exciting film. There's a lot of good things with it, but the story itself felt very simple. And one of the things that I think I realized in looking into that somewhat is this was actually not, I believe, the original plan that they had for Deadpool 3. They had a completely different direction, a completely different thought of where they wanted to go with it until they found out that they were going to be able to get Hugh Jackman as Wolverine into this. They made a quick turn into this film being this story. Again, it's not a negative. It's more of just a sense of the film felt a bit obvious in where it wanted to take the story. They filled in a lot of those gaps with some amazing cameos and some amazing dialogue and twists and turns within the individual scenes that were occurring. But I don't think there was ever a moment within this story where it kind of took Deadpool and the franchise of Deadpool into a direction that I really didn't expect or kind of foresee. A lot of that is, this one kind of is a capstone and moving on from the 20th Century Fox style of films. And so they definitely treat it that way. They definitely treat it as kind of a sign-off to what was before. I think one thing that really rang through in this film was that it really did have a bit more of a heart. More than anything, this film did a very, very excellent job of making me root for Wade Wilson and root for the film's heroes. Obviously, the heroes do a lot of horrible things and awful things throughout the film. But when I got to the end of it, there were actually definitely moments where it felt like there was a satisfying setup and payoff to the overall journey that Wade Wilson and Deadpool went on this film. That mixed with Wolverine and Cassandra Nova. If there was anything that I would have sort of elevated this film into a higher echelon for me, it would have been through the incorporation of some additional subplots that had some bigger impact on the overall characters and story in the film. It felt like there were some very, very, very minor sort of B, C, D plots that were incorporated into this, but it really just felt like a lot of time it was a vehicle for Deadpool, Wade Wilson, as well as Wolverine to interact and spend time together. That's enjoyable. That was neat. There was a lot of, again, cool cameos and tie-ins to other franchises within not just the MCU, but also the 20th Century Fox universe. And there was times where I was completely surprised and taken off guard in a positive way, and left feeling like, oh, that's really neat and a cool thing to sort of see get incorporated into this film. So again, I know I said that overall the story wasn't good, or as good as I would have liked, but that isn't to say that it wasn't a good film. There's a lot here. I just think that this film in particular, you need to have seen a lot of both the 20th century, the Deadpool films, the MCU, in order to truly appreciate it for everything that it could be. It's not an amazing standalone film. The good news of that, though, is that, as I stated, I think this left me very excited to see where they're going to be taking the MCU now that Deadpool's a part of it. I think he adds a very necessary wildcard element, if you will, a very necessary sense of moving forward in the franchise. And without spoiling anything in particular, I will just say that I'm excited to see how his incorporation into the MCU will have impacts on things such as the X-Men, such as the upcoming Fantastic Four, such as even the Avengers, and any iterations of his character into those different types of films could be a really fun thing. So overall on the story side, I gave it about a C+ range. Acting, once again, I think they knocked it out of the park. Everybody that was a part of this felt very authentic, and also considering the very large number of cameos that were wrapped into this film, it was very impressive to me that everybody that sort of found their way into this film fit. And it never felt like, okay, this is just a person doing this for a paycheck or just them trying to check off a box of having this successful cameo. There was a few surprising cameos. There was a few moments that were just kind of neat and awesome. I will say there was a couple people that felt like maybe these roles have sort of aged out of them, or they're no longer the type of person that I would genuinely see in that role. But at the same time, it never felt like I was taken out of the film by anything with any of the acting or any of the characters. And so I did give that an A. Cinematography and VFX-wise, I felt like they nailed it. There was a lot of really creative usage of camera perspective, especially during a lot of the fight scenes. They did an amazingly good job of making everything build and feel epic and kind of like intense, despite the fact that Wade Wilson, Deadpool, as well as Wolverine are unkillable. Every time they fought, it felt like I was interested, I was engaged. They were doing a very good job as well with the pacing of the editing, so it never felt like I was just kind of waiting for something to take place in a boring sense and going, when is the next thing going to happen? When are we going to move on from the scene? A lot of times when the cinematography and the editing, the pacing is off, you get this sense that things just feel a little bit boring or a little bit off, and I never really got that with this film. Everything felt very creative. It felt very forward-moving, and the pacing felt very nice. VFX-wise as well, there was nothing in this film that looked fake or that looked really cheesy. Now, there's definitely very obvious VFX that are being used. I mean, some of that is just based upon how unrealistic some of these things that, you're seeing in the film, floating, talking skull, or, I'm not going to go into too much again with spoilers, but a number of different action scenes with huge explosions and, special effects of people's powers. A couple effects in particular, especially by Emma Corrin, and the way that they used her powers interacting with people were just very interestingly and well done. Felt very unnerving and kind of like off-putting in a very effective way. One of the other points that I would obviously talk about with this film has to do with the music. They made a lot of really fun stylistic choices, is the best way that I could put it, with the music. There's a number of really cool scenes that incorporate the music into the actual film, where the characters are interacting in a way or doing something with other characters. They're interacting with the camera in a way that makes use of the soundtrack. This is, in a sense, is on the verge of being like almost a musical song and dance number in this film, again, without spoiling anything. But it happens in a really fun way. It happens in a really exciting way. And it's something that I think overall I really enjoyed watching. One thing that I felt about this film in particular, and these are just kind of like some overall general thoughts before I give an overall rating for it, there is a sense, just in having experienced the first two films, that this one was a little bit lighter when it came to the overall crassness of it. It's a hard R film. There's tons of gore. There's definitely, tons of usage of, foul language and over-the-top humor. But there was definitely a sense that this one was like taken from maybe like the last ones went to 11. This one was more at like an 8 a 7 or 8. And I wonder somewhat if that had to do with this being now officially associated with the MCU and Disney, or if that was just kind of a byproduct of it being the third film and just the way that they wanted to take the story. So that was interesting to me. It wasn't a turnoff. It never felt like a bad thing. I think, if anything, the first couple films at times felt a little bit too shocking for the sake of being shocking. This one, there's still very intense, very over-the-top moments, but they never felt completely like, oh, look at how crazy we're being, or look at how over-the-top we're being. Again, if you're going to a film like this and you're wanting to get over-the-top action and really crazy dialogue and interactions between the characters, you're not going to be disappointed. It's R for a reason. That was just an overall sense that I had of the film. I think also at the end of this one, it really left me wondering where they might be able to take the Deadpool story with standalone independent films. I know there are a number of really interesting directions they could take this if they want to go completely very over the top with how Deadpool's been treated in the comics. There's the iteration of Deadpool in the comics of, Deadpool kills everyone, which is literally Deadpool breaking free of his bonds and killing everyone. And that could be a really interesting thing that they could do. I'll be interested to see, though, if they do try to spin this into a fourth film. I think they kind of are obligated to at this point. It's, as of the recording of this film, I believe the highest grossing R-rated film ever released. And I do feel like studios these days are not going to take that lying down. It'll be interesting to see if Marvel takes that as usage of moving this into its own standalone film again, or just trying to incorporate Deadpool into other parts of the franchise, and maybe in an attempt or way to bring some attention to those other properties and kind of launch them up. We have yet to get a new Avengers cast. We have an idea of who that Avenger group could be, but we don't have that yet. We have a couple films coming out in the next year or two, which could relaunch the Avengers. They've officially announced the Secret Wars and Doctor Doom, but that doesn't necessarily put into place an Avengers team. It might become something where the Fantastic Four are sort of the Avengers, if you will, that they are sort of the main grouping, and people are kind of floating in and out of the Fantastic Four in different ways. But we'll see. A couple other things of note. I thought it was really cool that each one of the films in this franchise was a different director. Sean Levy did an excellent job with this film. He's actually somebody that I recognize as a director from a number of different things, but specifically he did Stranger Things. He did a number of different episodes of the Stranger Things franchise, which is, has been one of my favorite franchises of the modern Netflix era, if you will. But overall, I did enjoy it, and because of that, I'm going to give this film a 90, which is a A-. I would definitely suggest, if you're somebody that has not seen this film yet, which is probably not a ton of you considering how popular it is, go see it, go enjoy it. It's not a kid's film, definitely for an adult audience, but it's a very enjoyable one, and you should definitely check it out if you get the chance. Our next film we are going to discuss today is Borderlands. The synopsis for this film is based on the best-selling video game. This all-star action-adventure follows a ragtag team of misfits on a mission to save a missing girl who holds the key to unimaginable power. Unimaginable power. Its director is Eli Roth. It stars a whole bunch of people. Top of the list is Cate Blanchett as Lilith, Ariana Greenblatt as Tiny Tina, Kevin Hart as Roland, Florian Montagu as Krieg, Jamie Lee Curtis as Tannis, and Edgar Ramirez as Atlas. Now, this film was a very different experience for me than what I had hoped and expected for it to be. Coming into this film, I really didn't have a lot of expectations. I think that video game films over the last 5 to 10 years have really come into a new type of era. I'm not going to say that obviously and clearly every video game film that's been released is a great one, but I think for the longest time there was this running idea and thought in Hollywood that video game films just couldn't be successful, that they couldn't make it within the market. And I think we've seen now that that's just not the case. There is room for video game films to come in and be successful, and there are some other ones coming down the pipeline that I'm excited to see. This one, however, I feel like was a bit of a setback for the industry. Right off the get-go, I will say I played Borderlands 2, I made it all the way through that entire game. I did enjoy the video game quite a bit. I enjoyed the style of it. I enjoyed the action of it, the overall world building that was within it. And I think because of that, I was coming into this thinking and feeling that if they had done their homework, if they had really put themselves into this world successfully, then they would be able to translate that into a very interesting, if nothing else, film. Now, they definitely did their homework in the sense of checking off boxes of different types of characters and overall scenery and the different types of main plot points that occurred within the Borderlands franchise. However, what I think the big thing that's missing from this film, if I had to just summarize it way down, is that they were aiming for a PG-13 rating with this film. I went into this thinking that it was going to be something similar to what we got with Deadpool and Wolverine. Over-the-top action, crassness, crazy violence, people being, in a sense, crazy, and just having fun with that and enjoying that with the characters. It felt like that was what they were going for, but they were going for that at a PG-13 level. So the best way that I can explain it is I think that there would have been a lot more enjoyment and entertainment from this if they really could have leaned into the dark comedic elements of the story. I mean, it's situated within a franchise where dark comedy is almost constantly at the forefront. I think because of that, I had a lot of expectations for how crazy and off the wall, off the chain, however you want to say it, this could have gotten. But it never really approached that. It felt like constantly they were putting the brakes on anything that could have gone more over the top and more intense. So just starting at the top, story-wise, it felt very, very not only predictable, but also very much like a series of events occurring. I think sometimes you can have a film that's predictable and it can be enjoyable. I think that's why we rewatch films as much as we do, because sometimes we like that predictability that we get out of a film. But I think what you can't also have with that is a series of just ongoing events. There has to be a good and significant internal structure to make it feel like the film is building on itself, that there's interesting stakes that are there, that there's a sense of setup and payoff with the film. There was a very small number of ways in which this film felt like it was doing setup and payoff. Most of the time, things just happened. They would be looking for something, and then there would be an action scene because we haven't had an action scene in a while, and inevitably they would find the thing they were looking for, and then would have to kill a bunch of people and then run over here. And, then they would be on the run from this group of other bad people, and so they would have to go do some crazy chase that would lead them to the next part of the plot. So it just felt like a series of and all this just stepping into the next plot point. I think even if this film had been a bit predictable as it was, if that had been partnered with really funny characters, really funny dialogue, real over-the-top, suspenseful action, like we got in Deadpool and Wolverine, the story would have been elevated above that sort of weak plot. But it never got there. And so I gave the story a very low rating. I gave the story an F, 45 out of 100, because I don't think that there's really a lot that I can say positively, other than I do think that they did a good job, like I said, of recognizing the world that this was built in. It distinctly felt like this is the world of Borderlands. This is the world of Pandora, where the film is primarily set on, and the characters themselves all felt like a version of the characters from the video games. With that, I would also like to say with the character discussion, the acting side of things. This film, I think, suffered again from a lot of the time not really knowing the place that it wanted to reside in. And now I know that this film had a number of different reshoots, and it was directed by Eli Roth, who I think is not a bad director, but Eli Roth, for me, at least from my knowledge of him, is very much a horror, intense, very hard R type film director. And if that was the direction that they were going in with this with Eli Roth, it felt like they had really neutered that. They'd really cut that back, especially with the acting or the way that they were, structuring the dialogue with the different actors. It felt like everybody in the script was trying to be crazy. It felt like all of the acting was like, oh, I'm going to act this way now because that means that I'm crazy. Instead of just being in the craziness, it felt like, oh, well, we have to have this moment where because I'm crazy, I'm just going to throw a grenade way too close to everybody. It felt very on the nose, and the acting was also a translation of that. It'd be like if you just ran up to some random person and said, okay, act crazy, and put them on the spot. It didn't feel like these were people that really had a deep connection to the more intense elements of the characters. And now, one character in particular, Tiny Tina, if you're familiar with the Borderlands franchise, she is just an insane character in so many ways, especially within the Borderlands franchise. And I'm not trying to attack the actor. A lot of it might have been the script and the plot and the way that they wanted to write it to go more for the PG-13 rating. But it never really felt like that character locked into anything really crazy. It just felt more of like, I'm a hurt person that's trying to resolve some of my inner wounds. And that was kind of the vibe that I was getting from a lot of the acting was, I'm a hurt character that's trying to resolve some of my inner wounds, which for a film like Borderlands, again, when they're trying to go for just zany, off the wall, over the top, that's not really the vibe that I think you would want to get from a lot of the acting. And so I gave the acting a D-. Continuing on, I think on the side of the VFX and the cinematography, I gave both of those around a C, C- type range. They weren't bad, but there was nothing with them that really blew me away. I think the VFX at times were good, and there was a lot that needed to happen within these scenes in this completely made-up world with, crazy lasers and explosions and stuff. I think anything that felt practical felt real, but there was a lot of times where they needed to do something that was completely foreign. A lot of those VFX felt very fake to me. They felt very obvious and clear, and it wasn't approaching the level where it took me out of the film, but it definitely approached the level of just meh. They were just okay. And that mixed with the cinematography that I felt like really just kind of felt very standard. There's a way of putting together certain shots that bring you into a film or make you feel a certain way. And this did not do that. It felt like it was really just a presentation of the moments that were happening and trying to present that in the clearest way possible. A lot of that was with the pacing of the editing. It felt like at times things were just kind of just jumping from one shot to the next shot to try and keep the pacing good. I will say the editing wasn't bad, but it didn't really do anything to make me feel further engaged with a character. I think there's some things that can be done. When we talk about pacing, that has a lot to do with editing, where, you linger on a character for a little longer to show maybe that they're going through something, or maybe there's a way of doing an insert shot and jumping to a certain type of other shot that makes you feel a certain way about the action that's taking place. Nothing like that even really occurred. Again, it pretty much felt like they just used the shots as they were created and filmed for the actual production. So sort of my overall ranking for the cinematography and the editing and the VFX all wrapped into one was at the D level. Music-wise as well, there wasn't a lot to write home about. I think the music soundtrack was very simple. It didn't feel like there was anything when I was leaving the theater that was going to stick with me. It's not something that I would really be interested in getting the soundtrack for, or following up on, the different types of songs that they used in the actual film itself. Going back to the discussion on Deadpool and Wolverine, I would love to get the soundtrack for that film, not just because I liked the songs, but also because of the way that they were incorporated and used in the film. When I hear those songs, it reminds me of those different scenes from the movie. This film, if I heard the music, I would just think, there's that song. It wouldn't in any way connect me to a scene from the film that I would get to feel in a small sense like I was reconnecting with that moment from the film. It wasn't poorly put together. It wasn't poorly designed. It was just kind of there. And so I gave the music a 75, which was a C ranking as well. So to summarize my overall thoughts, I feel like really sadly what this was a missed opportunity. There was a lot of discussion that the script was such an amazing script, and it had a lot of interest in Hollywood, and how, whether it was through Eli Roth or other people, when this came into this place of actually being produced and directed, there was a bunch of changes, if you will, that were made to the actual script, and the original writer actually took his name off of the production. And I think it feels like a film that was neutered. It feels like a film that had a heavy tonal shift or tonal change and never really locked into a different tone. You can a really good script for a film, I think when you either read it or you think about it, it leaves you with a sense of something, whether that's despair, if it's horror, or hope, or excitement, or, the sense of longing. There's so many things that a good script will do for you. And when you look at this film and you look at what it left, it didn't really leave me with any sense of anything. It just kind of felt like wasted time. And in that sense, it didn't make it the worst film. I know it's doing horribly in the theaters right now, and I'm in no way saying that people should go see this film, but it just kind of really left me with a sense of meh. It didn't leave me with any sense of excitement on where they could take the franchise. It didn't leave me wondering, what's going to happen with these characters now that the story of this film is over with. And again, I feel like that's really a missed opportunity, because I do think video game films can be successful and they can do well. And I do think that this was a series, the Borderlands series, that really could have been interesting and really could have taken us into a different genre of video game films, not just for children, but video game films that can be violent and over the top and crazy in nature. And so my overall ranking for Borderlands was 63. I gave it a D-. So those are my overall thoughts on Deadpool and Wolverine, as well as Borderlands. I'd love to know your thoughts and your perspectives on both of these films. Maybe you loved them, maybe you hated them. So you can shoot me an email at reelreviewmedia@gmail.com. There are also a number of different ways to get connected to this show, to this podcast. If you'd like to get connected to our channel and the show, you can check us out on our website and get connected to all of our different social profiles, as well as the vidcast and the podcast at reelreviewmedia.com. Thanks for checking out the show, and as always, it's been real.